Cerberus, the hellhound who was actually a guardian. There are names that echo from the deepest chasms of mythology, names that have become synonymous with terror itself. They are the nightmares that guard the edges of our world, the sentinels of the forbidden. But among these titans of dread, one figure stands alone at the final threshold. He is not a god to be worshipped, nor a titan to be overthrown. He is a warden, a gatekeeper, the first and last face seen by souls on their ultimate journey. He is the hound of Hades, the guardian of the underworld. He is Cerberus. For millennia, his name has conjured images of a slavering, three-headed beast, a mindless monster guarding the fiery gates of a Christianized hell. He is the ultimate guard dog, a brute force of snarling fury. But to see him as only this is to misunderstand the very fabric of the cosmos he served. It is to mistake the jailer for the prison, the shadow for the abyss itself. The true nature of Cerberus is a profound paradox. He is a creature of ultimate chaos, born to serve absolute order. He is a monster tasked with upholding a divine law. So we must ask the question that lies at the heart of his myth: is he merely the hound of hell, a beast of mindless destruction? Or is he something more? Is he the guardian of a far deeper gate, the gate that separates life from death, memory from oblivion, and upholds the sacred balance of the universe? Today we open the codex to the chapter written in shadow and bone. We journey down past the river Styx, to the grim and echoing halls of Hades, to truly understand the guardian at the gate. This is the story of Cerberus explained. To comprehend the nature of a guardian, one must first look to the blood that flows in his veins, to the shadows from which he was born. Cerberus was not a creature crafted by a god's whim or sprung fully formed from the earth. He was a scion of a dynasty, the progeny of a lineage so steeped in terror that its members form the very bedrock of monstrous legend. To understand the hound, we must first understand his heritage, a family tree whose roots are nourished by chaos and whose branches cast the darkest shadows upon the age of heroes. His story begins with his father, a name that even the gods of Olympus spoke with dread: Typhon. Typhon was not merely a monster, he was the father of all monsters, the ultimate embodiment of primordial, volcanic chaos. He was a being of such inconceivable scale and power that ancient poets struggled to describe him. His gargantuan form was so immense that his head brushed against the stars themselves. His arms were so long they could stretch from the rising of the sun to its setting. From his shoulders sprang 100 writhing heads of dragons, each with a flickering, dark tongue and eyes that blazed with a terrifying fire. His voice was a cacophony of every horrifying sound imaginable: the hiss of serpents, the roar of lions, the bellowing of bulls, and at times, the articulate and dreadful speech of the gods. He was the final and most formidable challenger to the Olympian order. After Zeus had vanquished the Titans, Gaia, the Earth Mother, brought forth Typhon as her last son. A final terrible champion to reclaim the cosmos for the old ways. The ensuing battle, the Titanomachy, was a cataclysm that nearly unmade the world. Typhon tore mountains from their foundations and hurled them at the heavens. He defeated Zeus in their first encounter, tearing the very sinews from the thunder god's limbs and leaving him helpless. It was only through the intervention of Hermes and the unwavering might of Zeus in their final, apocalyptic confrontation that Typhon was finally overthrown, blasted by 100 thunderbolts and imprisoned beneath the volcanic Mount Etna in Sicily. There, to this day, his undying rage is set to fuel the volcano's fire, a constant smoldering reminder of the chaos that lies chained, but not destroyed, beneath the surface of the world. This was the father of Cerberus, chaos incarnate, cosmic rebellion personified, the ultimate enemy of divine law and order. The mother of Cerberus was no less terrifying, though her horror was of a different, more insidious nature. She was Echidna, the mother of all monsters. While Typhon was a force of overt, cataclysmic destruction, Echidna was the patient, brooding source from which nightmares spring. She was a paradox of form, from the waist up, a nymph of devastating beauty with piercing eyes; from the waist down, a monstrous and massive speckled serpent. She did not roam the world spreading destruction. Instead, she lurked in a hollow cave, a place called Arima, deep within the secret places of the earth. There she lived an eternal predatory existence, a creature of immortal youth and unspeakable hunger. She was the womb of horrors, the matriarch of a monstrous dynasty. From the union of Typhon, the ultimate chaos, and Echidna, the eternal mother of nightmares, a terrible and magnificent brood was spawned. Their children were not random beasts, they were living legends of dread, each one a dark trial sent to test the courage and might of the dawning age of heroes. From this union came the Lernaean Hydra, the 9-headed water serpent whose breath and blood were pure poison, and who grew 2 new heads for each one that was severed. From them came the dread Chimera, a fire-breathing abomination with the head and body of a lion, a goat's head rising from its back, and a venomous serpent for a tail. From them came the Nemean lion, a beast of immense power whose golden fur was impervious to mortal weapons, a creature that could only be slain by the raw strength of a demigod. And from them came Orthrus, the 2-headed hound who guarded the fabulous red cattle of the giant Geryon. Orthrus was, in many ways, the forerunner to his more famous brother, a dark prototype for the guardian to come. And so, into this fraternity of terror Cerberus was born. By his very bloodline, by the essence of his father's chaos and his mother's monstrous nature, he was destined to be a creature of primal violence. He was forged in shadow, his spirit intrinsically tied to the very forces that sought to unravel the ordered world. In any other context, he would have been a roaming blight, a fiend to be hunted down and slain by a questing hero. But fate, and the grim, silent king of the underworld, had a different, far more specific, and infinitely more profound purpose for this son of Typhon. His chaotic nature would not be unleashed upon the world of the living to sow destruction. Instead, it would be harnessed. It would be chained to a post, given a singular, eternal, and unshirkable duty. He was to become the ultimate expression of a paradox that lies at the heart of the Greek cosmos, a monster in the service of divine law. His destiny was not to destroy order but to become its most terrifying enforcer. Before we can place the guardian at his post, we must first understand the domain he was destined to protect. To comprehend the purpose of Cerberus, one must first journey in spirit into his kingdom, a realm misunderstood by the modern mind, a place not of fire and brimstone, but of inexorable order and profound, eternal quiet. The underworld of the ancient Greeks is not the Christian hell. It is crucial to divest ourselves of this later conception. It was not primarily a place of punishment for the sinful, filled with demons and eternal damnation. The realm of Hades was something far more philosophically complex, more somber, and in its own way, far more terrifying. It was the inevitable final destination of every mortal soul. Hero and coward, rich and poor, virtuous and wicked, all were destined to walk its shadowed paths. Upon death, the psyche, the faint ethereal echo of the living person, would be guided by the god Hermes in his role as Psychopompus, the guide of souls. He would lead them down through the dark places of the earth until they reached the shores of a great, dark river. This was the river Styx, the river of unbreakable oaths, so sacred that even the gods swore upon its waters. Across its murky, silent currents, the spectral ferryman Charon would transport the souls of the recently deceased. But passage was not free. Charon, a grim and ancient figure, demanded payment. A single obelisk, a coin placed in the mouth of the dead by their living relatives. Those who were buried without this fare were doomed to wander the near bank for 100 years, trapped between two worlds. Once across, the souls entered the vast kingdom proper, a realm of many divisions. Deepest of all was Tartarus, a lightless abyss, a cosmic prison as far below the earth as the earth is below the heavens. This was the place of true punishment, reserved not for ordinary sinners, but for the greatest enemies of the gods, the vanquished titans, chained in eternal darkness, and for those mortals whose hubris was so immense that it offended the very fabric of the cosmos. Here, figures like Tantalus, Sisyphus, and Ixion suffered their ingenious and eternal torments. The vast majority of souls, however, were destined for the asphodel meadows. This was not a place of joy or sorrow, but of profound neutrality. It was a vast, gray, and joyless plain, covered in pale, ghostly asphodel flowers. Here, the shades of ordinary people wandered for eternity, listless, witless, and bodiless, with no memory of their former lives, no personality, and no purpose. They were but faint echoes, twittering like bats, a testament to the utter erasure of the self in death. Finally, for a select few, there was Elysium, or the Elysian Fields. This was a paradise, a realm of eternal spring, gentle breezes, and blissful existence. It was a reward reserved for the most heroic and virtuous of mortals, for demigods, and for those specially favored by the gods. Here, they could spend eternity in pleasurable pursuits, retaining their memories and identities. This entire kingdom, in all its dark majesty and complex divisions, was ruled by a single, powerful, and universally feared god, Hades. He was one of the three great sons of Kronos, the brother of Zeus and Poseidon. When the three brothers drew lots for their share of the cosmos, Zeus claimed the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades, the eldest, drew the grim but vital domain of the underworld. It is essential to understand that Hades was not the devil. He was not a force of evil, nor was he malevolent. He was a king, a grim, inexorable, and utterly just monarch of a necessary kingdom. His many epithets reveal his nature. Pluton, the rich one, for all the precious metals and gems of the earth were his. Hades, the unseen one, for he rarely left his realm, and Polydegmon, the receiver of many, for all mortals would eventually become his subjects. His primary role was that of a divine administrator, and a guardian of cosmic law. And the law he upheld was the most fundamental and sacred of all: the dead stay dead. The barrier between the world of the living and the world of the dead was meant to be absolute and inviolable. Life was for the living, death was for the dead. For a living mortal to enter the land of the dead was a profound transgression, a violation of natural law. But for a dead soul to escape back into the world of light, that was an abomination. It was a terrifying prospect that could unravel the very fabric of existence, blurring the lines that gave life its meaning and death its finality. And this brings us back to Cerberus, into the profound paradox of his appointment. Why would Hades, this grim king of cosmic order, this steadfast upholder of the most sacred law, choose a son of Typhon, the very embodiment of cosmic chaos, as his chief sentinel? The answer lies in the nature of the gate itself. To guard the ultimate threshold, one needs the ultimate deterrent. Hades did not need a loyal, well-behaved soldier. He needed a being of such absolute and primal terror that the very thought of challenging it would be unthinkable. He needed a creature whose monstrous nature would serve as a living, breathing, snarling wall between two worlds. Only a being born of ultimate chaos could be trusted to enforce such rigid, absolute order. So Cerberus was placed at the gates of Hades, the primary entrance to the underworld. His eternal duty was precise and twofold, and in this specificity we find his true purpose. First, he was to be welcoming, even fawning, to all the new shades who arrived after crossing the Styx. He would greet them with wagging tails and friendly gestures. This was because the dead belonged in the underworld. Their entry was not a transgression, it was the proper, final step in the natural order of things. But his second duty was absolute and terrible. He was to savagely attack and devour any soul that attempted to escape. Furthermore, he was to prevent, with all of his monstrous fury, any living mortal from passing through the gates without the express permission of his master. He was not a punisher of the dead within their realm. He was the guardian of their finality. His role was not one of malice but of cosmic necessity. He was the living embodiment of the underworld's fundamental law, a law spoken not in words, but in snarls and snapping teeth. Once you enter, you never leave. He was the monster that allowed the cosmos to make sense. What then of the beast itself? What was the nature of this guardian? This monster tasked with upholding a divine decree. The ancient poets and mythographers have left us a fearsome and detailed portrait. A physical description that is not merely a catalogue of horrors, but a tapestry of profound symbolism. In the details of his form, we can begin to discern the deeper meaning of his role. First and most famously, there is the matter of his heads. While the earliest poet Hesiod, in his Theogony, described Cerberus with a staggering 50 heads, a number meant to convey an almost unimaginable level of terror and vigilance, is the tripartite image that has resonated through the ages and become his definitive form. The image of the three-headed hound is the one that has been etched into the bedrock of Western consciousness. Why three? The symbolism is rich for interpretation, a nexus of mythological and philosophical thought. Later Roman writers, seeking to imbue the myth with deeper meaning, suggested that the three heads represented the past, the present, and the future. In this view, Cerberus is a guardian of time itself, a creature who oversees the transition of souls from the linear progression of mortal life into a state of eternity. Others proposed a more biological symbolism, suggesting they represented the three stages of life: birth, youth, and old age. Every soul that passed him had completed this cycle. However, the most direct and powerful interpretation is one of ultimate, inescapable vigilance. The three heads ensured a constant, unwavering watch over the final gate. One head might be turned, one might sleep, but others would always be awake, alert, and watchful. Nothing and no one could pass his post unobserved. His three heads were a physical manifestation of his absolute effectiveness as a sentinel. His voice was not the simple bark of a mortal dog. The poets describe it as a sound that could shatter the resolve of any hero. It was said to be like the clang of clashing bronze, a terrifying, metallic roar that echoed through the vast, silent halls of the underworld, a sound that was both a warning and a sentence. His body was not merely canine, it was a chthonic menagerie, a living mosaic of his monstrous heritage. His back was often described as being bristled not with fur, but with a mane of living, hissing serpents, a direct and horrifying inheritance from his mother Echidna. This feature linked him not just to the earth, but to the venomous and treacherous things that lurk within it. His very form was a constant reminder of his chaotic and deadly lineage. His tail, in many accounts, was not a tail at all but a living, venomous serpent, complete with its own head and fangs, which would strike out at those who tried to pass. Every part of him was a weapon, every feature a warning. He was a perfectly designed killing machine, a biological fortress. But perhaps the most telling descriptions of his nature come from his behavior, which was defined by a stark duality. As described by Virgil in his epic, the Aeneid, and other writers, his ferocity was directional. To the newly arrived shades, the spirits of the dead coming to their final home, he was passive, even welcoming. His purpose was not to terrorize them, but his full, unrestrained fury was unleashed upon two types of transgressors: the dead who sought to return to the light, and the living who dared to trespass into the dark. It was this directed aggression that defined him. He was not a creature of mindless rage, he was a creature of specific and unwavering purpose. Even his name is a source of scholarly debate, a clue shrouded in the mists of linguistic history. The etymology is uncertain. One compelling theory suggests it might derive from the Proto-Indo-European word Cerberus, which simply means spotted. This might seem mundane, even anticlimactic for such a terrifying creature. But in the context of ancient naming conventions for dogs, Spot, or Spotted One, is a perfectly plausible name. It grounds the cosmic horror in a familiar reality, making the Hound of Hades a grim, divine reflection of a mortal guard dog. A more evocative, though less academically certain, theory connects his name to the Greek phrase Kerberethru, which translates to demon of the pit. This name certainly captures the terror he inspired, but it leans more towards the later, simplified, Hound of Hell interpretation, perhaps missing the nuance of his role. Ultimately, the key to understanding Cerberus's nature lies in the profound paradox of his existence. He is a monster born of chaos, a direct descendant of the greatest enemy the Olympian order ever faced. And yet, his entire existence is dedicated to preventing chaos. The specific chaos he prevents is the catastrophic intermingling of the realms of the living and the dead. In this sense, he is not an agent of destruction, but an agent of cosmic preservation. He preserves the sanctity and meaning of life by ensuring the absolute finality of death. Life is precious because it is finite. The joys, sorrows, loves, and ambitions of mortals have weight because they exist within a limited time frame. If the dead could simply wander back, death would lose its power and life would lose its urgency. The entire cosmic order would collapse into meaninglessness. Cerberus, the son of chaos, is therefore the linchpin of cosmic order. He is the monster that allows the universe to make sense. He is not a hound of hellish punishment, waiting to torment the sinful. He is the guardian of a deep, sacred, and terrifying truth. The boundary between what is and what was must be absolute. And such an absolute law requires an absolute guardian. The true measure of any guardian, the true test of any gate, is found in the character of those who dare to challenge it. The gates of Hades were meant to be impassable for the living. Yet the annals of myth tell of a select few mortals who, driven by profound love, sacred duty, or divine quest, ventured into the darkness. They came face to face with the hound of Hades, and their encounters are profoundly revealing. They show us that Cerberus was not an obstacle to be overcome solely by brute strength. He was a law to be petitioned, a force to be pacified, a sorrow to be soothed. The most poignant and celebrated of these tales is that of Orpheus, the master musician of Thrace, the son of the muse of epic poetry, Calliope. His skill with the lyre was so divine that it was said he could charm the very rocks and trees and tame the wildest of beasts. When his beloved wife, the nymph Eurydice, was tragically killed by a viper's bite on their wedding day, Orpheus was consumed by a grief so vast and so absolute that it drove him to do the unthinkable. He resolved to defy death itself. He would descend into the underworld as a living man and persuade the king and queen of the dead to release his bride. His only weapon was his music. He journeyed down into the gloom, and the power of his art preceded him. His sorrowful melodies charmed the silent, spectral ferryman Charon, who carried him across the Styx without demanding payment. His music drifted through the asphodel meadows, and for a fleeting moment, the witless shades paused their aimless wandering, as if stirred by a forgotten memory. His song reached the depths of Tartarus, and the tormented souls found a moment's respite. Tantalus forgot his thirst, the wheel of Ixion stood still, and the Danaïdes rested from their endless task. Sisyphus himself sat upon his stone to listen, and the cheeks of the Furies, the merciless goddesses of vengeance, were wet with tears of iron. And then Orpheus came to the final gate and its monstrous guardian. Cerberus rose to meet him, his three throats swelling with a terrifying bronze-like roar, his serpent mane bristling with rage, ready to deny the living man passage and tear him limb from limb. But then Orpheus began to play. He poured all of his love for Eurydice, all of his grief at her loss, and all of his desperate hope into his music. It was a song of such breathtaking beauty, such heartbreaking sorrow, that the entire underworld fell silent. The very air grew still to listen. And Cerberus, the fearsome monster, the untamable son of Typhon, was subdued. His ferocious barking ceased. His serpent tail lay still upon the ground. The great hound, utterly captivated and disarmed by the sheer power of mortal love expressed through divine art, lay down, his three heads resting on his paws, and whimpered softly. Orpheus, the living man, walked past the guardian of the dead, unharmed. This encounter reveals a crucial and profound truth about the beast. For all his monstrous fury, Cerberus possessed a soul that could be touched by beauty, a heart that could be moved by grief. He was not mindless rage. He was a guardian who could be overcome by an appeal to something deeper than law, the power of love. Centuries later, another hero would make the same journey. But his purpose and his methods were different. This was the Trojan hero Aeneas, a man burdened by destiny, tasked with founding the great civilization of Rome. To understand his fate, he had to consult the shade of his father, Anchises, in the underworld. Guided by the wise prophetess, the Sibyl of Cumae, Aeneas came prepared for the trials ahead. When they approached the gate, Cerberus confronted them, his form immense and terrifying in the gloom, his triple-throated barking filling the entire region. He was a wall of sound and fury. But the Sibyl had not come to fight or to charm. She had come to pacify. She carried with her a cake, specially prepared from honey and drugged with soporific herbs. Seeing the snakes on the beast's neck begin to writhe and his hunger rise, the Sibyl simply threw the drugged cake into his three ravenous mouths. The beast, driven by his primal canine nature, snatched it from the air and devoured it greedily. Almost immediately the potent drug took effect. A great drowsiness overcame him. His massive body relaxed, and he collapsed onto the cavern floor, sprawling across the entrance in a deep and sudden slumber. Aeneas and the Sibyl, their passage now clear, stepped over the sleeping guardian. They had not defeated him, they had simply bypassed his function through cunning and an understanding of his base instincts. This theme of pacification is repeated in the later allegorical tale of Psyche, the beautiful mortal princess whose love for the god Eros earned her the jealous wrath of the goddess Aphrodite. As one of the series of impossible tasks set for her, Psyche too was commanded to descend into the underworld to retrieve a box of beauty from Queen Persephone. She was carefully instructed on how to navigate the dangers. She was to carry 2 honey cakes in her hands and 2 coins in her mouth. 1 coin was for Charon on the way in, the other on the way out. And the cakes were for Cerberus. She passed the first cake to the hound upon her entry, appeasing his hunger and securing her passage. After completing her task within the underworld, she used the second cake to pacify him again upon her exit, becoming one of the very few who ever made the return journey. These stories, taken together, paint a consistent and fascinating picture. The way to pass Cerberus is not through direct, armed conflict. The living who wish to trespass must do so through extraordinary means, through art that touches the soul, or through cunning that pacifies his animal nature. He is a test at the threshold, a law that is absolute for ordinary souls, but which can, on rare and divinely sanctioned occasions, be petitioned or bypassed. But there was one hero who would not come with music or with drugged cakes. A hero whose very essence was overwhelming indomitable force. A demigod who would meet the guardian not with art or cunning, but with pure, unadulterated might. And his encounter with Cerberus would be unlike any other. It would be a clash of titans, a battle of brute strength against monstrous fury that would shake the very foundations of the underworld. His name was Heracles, the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene, the greatest and most powerful of all Greek heroes. For years, he had been bound in servitude to his cousin, the cowardly King Eurystheus of Mycenae, performing a series of 12 seemingly impossible tasks as penance for a past tragedy. He had slain the Nemean lion, destroyed the Lernaean hydra, captured the Erymanthian boar, and stolen the golden apples of the Hesperides. Having exhausted all the monsters and challenges of the mortal world, King Eurystheus, in a final, desperate attempt to be rid of the hero he both feared and envied, devised the 12th and ultimate labor. It was a task he believed to be beyond even the might of Heracles, a mission from which there could be no return. He commended the hero to do the unthinkable, the sacrilegious, to descend into the land of the dead, confront its guardian, and bring back Cerberus. This was not a quest for an inanimate object, but for a living, breathing god-beast, the personal warden of King Hades himself. It was an act of supreme hubris, a direct challenge to the order of the cosmos. To even attempt such a feat, Heracles knew he could not rely on strength alone. He first traveled to Eleusis, near Athens, and sought to be initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. These sacred rites, dedicated to the underworld-adjacent goddesses Demeter and Persephone, were a closely guarded secret, but their purpose was to grant initiates a deeper understanding of the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. For Heracles, the initiation served a dual purpose. It ritually cleansed him of the guilt of his past killings, and more importantly, it prepared his living soul to withstand the soul-crushing despair of the underworld, allowing him to enter not merely as a brute but as one who understood the sanctity of the realm he was about to violate. His passage into the Dark Kingdom was a testament to his sheer, overwhelming power. Guided by the gods Hermes and Athena, he reached the banks of the river Styx. The ferryman Charon, upon seeing the blazing eyes and divine power of the living demigod, was struck with terror and, against his own ancient laws, ferried Heracles across the river without demanding payment. The shades of the dead fled before him as he strode through the asphodel meadows, his vibrant, living presence a terrifying anomaly in the gray, silent land. Unlike other heroes who sought to sneak or trick their way through, Heracles marched directly to the black, obsidian palace of the king and queen of the dead. He stood before the throne of Hades and Persephone, and here, in a moment of profound respect for the cosmic order he was about to disrupt, he did not make a demand. He asked permission. He stated the nature of his labor, that he was bound by his oath to Eurystheus, and humbly requested that he be allowed to borrow the guardian of the gate. Hades, the grim and silent lord, considered this audacious petition. Perhaps he was impressed by the hero's respect, or perhaps he saw an opportunity to test the limits of this famed son of Zeus. He agreed to the request, but on one, crucial, and seemingly impossible condition. Heracles could take the hound, but only if he could subdue him with his bare hands. He was forbidden from using any weapons, no sword, no spear, and most importantly, not his famous olive-wood club. It was to be a contest of pure, raw strength, the might of the hero against the monstrous power of the beast. Heracles accepted the terms. He approached the gates of Acheron, where Cerberus stood sentinel. The confrontation was immediate and apocalyptic. Upon seeing the living, breathing hero, a being radiating a power that had no place in the land of the dead, the hound exploded into a fury. His 3 heads roared in unison, a sound like grinding metal that shook the very foundations of the underworld. The serpents on his back rose and hissed, and his serpent tail whipped through the air, dripping venom. The beast lunged. But Heracles was the son of Zeus. He was strength personified, a mortal who wrestled with gods. He weathered the initial assault, ignoring the snapping jaws and the venomous serpents that clawed and bit at his back, his tough Nemean lion skin protecting him from the worst of the attack. He did not strike back. He did not draw a weapon. He did as he was commanded. He closed the distance and wrapped his immense, godlike arms around the beast's 3 necks, locking him in an unbreakable stranglehold. What followed was a titanic struggle. Cerberus thrashed and fought with all the primal fury of his chaotic lineage, his claws tearing at the ground, his roars of pain and rage echoing through the silent kingdom. But he was no match for the apotheosis of mortal strength. Heracles held firm, his muscles like living rock, relentless and unyielding. He squeezed, cutting off the beast's breath, suffocating the roars in its three throats until, finally, the monstrous guardian, the terror of the underworld, choked into submission, went limp in his arms. Heracles had won. He slung the great, vanquished beast over his powerful shoulder and began the long, arduous ascent back to the world of light. For Cerberus, this was the ultimate humiliation and torment. Dragged from his dark, familiar home, the kingdom he was born to guard, and forced up into the mortal realm, into the blinding, painful, unfamiliar light of the sun. The ancient poets say that as the beast writhed in terror and agony upon the earth, his venomous spittle and drool frothed from his three mouths. Where this foam fell, the first poisonous aconite plant grew, a plant also known as wolfsbane. The guardian's pain and terror literally poisoned the mortal world. Heracles carried the defeated hound all the way to Mycenae and presented him to King Eurystheus. The cowardly king, upon seeing the actual, living, breathing hound of Hades, screamed in terror and leaped into a large bronze pithos, a storage jar, begging Heracles to take the monster away. The 12th and final labor was complete. But what Heracles did next is perhaps the most important part of the entire story, the act that reveals the hero's true understanding. He did not kill Cerberus. He did not abandon him in the mortal world to be a roaming terror. His oath fulfilled, he showed the beast to the king and then he returned him. He respectfully took the guardian back down to the underworld and restored him to his rightful post at the gates of Hades. Even Heracles, the greatest hero, a man who could wrestle a god-beast into submission, ultimately understood and respected the cosmic necessity of Cerberus. The guardian had been defeated, humiliated, and tormented. But in the end his purpose was too important, the law he upheld too sacred to be permanently broken. The gate must have its guardian. The labors of Heracles concluded, and the age of heroes eventually faded into the mists of history, but the legacy of Cerberus endured. The Hound of Hades is more than just a character in a collection of ancient stories. He is a powerful, multivalent archetype, a symbol whose meaning has shifted and evolved over the centuries, yet whose core purpose remains unsettlingly relevant to the human condition. In his purest, classical form, Cerberus is the ultimate symbol of the finality of death. In a world where gods meddle in mortal affairs and heroes regularly defy fate, Cerberus represents a boundary that cannot, and should not, be permanently crossed. His terrifying form is the physical manifestation of the primal fear of the unknown, the existential dread of oblivion that all mortals must eventually face. But his unwavering duty is simultaneously a quiet assurance of order. He ensures that the world of the living remains vibrant, precious, and meaningful, precisely because it is finite. By guarding the exit from the underworld, he preserves the integrity of life itself. His profound duality is his most enduring and important lesson. He is unequivocally the hound of hell in his appearance, in his monstrous lineage, and in the sheer abject terror he inspires. He is the product of chaos, rage, and primordial darkness. But he is the guardian of a deeper gate in his function. He serves reason, cosmic law, and the fundamental balance of the universe. He is the terrifying face of a necessary and inescapable truth. The horror of his form protects the sanctity of the natural order. This paradox is the heart of his myth, that something so monstrous could be so essential. However, as the centuries passed and the classical world gave way to a new Christianized Europe, the image of Cerberus began to change. His complex role was flattened, his nuanced purpose forgotten. In the grand Christian epic, Dante Alighieri's Inferno, Cerberus is transformed. He is no longer the noble, if terrifying, guardian of a neutral gate. Instead, he is a demon who presides over the third circle of hell, a realm of cold, filthy rain. Here, he rips and tears at the souls of the gluttonous, becoming a direct agent of divine punishment. He loses his regal, warden-like role and becomes a simple tormentor, his three heads a grotesque symbol of insatiable appetite. This version, stripped of its original context, reinforced the popular image of Cerberus as a mere hound of hell. Yet, even with this transformation, echoes of his original nature persist in our collective imagination. The archetype of the monstrous guardian at a forbidden threshold is a direct descendant of the myth of Cerberus. It is a powerful and recurring motif in literature and art. We see his shadow in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, with the character of Fluffy, a massive three-headed dog who guards the philosopher's stone, a direct and loving homage to the ancient hound. We see his influence in the countless gatekeepers of video game dungeons, in the beasts that guard forbidden tombs in adventure films, and in the monstrous sentinels that patrol the borders of enchanted realms in fantasy novels. The idea of a terrifying beast guarding a sacred, powerful, or dangerous passage is a thread woven directly from the loom of his myth. So, what are we to make of this creature in the end? How do we answer the question we posed at the beginning of our journey? Is he the hound of hell or the guardian of a deeper gate? The truth, as is often the case in the deep myths, is that he is both, and the tension between these two aspects is what gives him his power. To call him only a monster is true, but it is an incomplete truth that ignores his vital function. To call him only a guardian is also true, but it sanitizes the primal, necessary terror he represents. He is the perfect synthesis of chaos and order. He is a creature whose monstrous nature is the very tool that allows him to perform a sacred cosmic duty. He is the living embodiment of the unsettling idea that some laws are so fundamental, some boundaries so important, that they must be guarded by a horror beyond our comprehension. He is the snarl that protects the silent hum of the universe. He is the darkness that gives the light its form and its preciousness. He is the loyal servant of a grim king, the necessary monster at the door of eternity, and the terrifying, final guardian of the truth that defines us all. The myth of Cerberus forces us to look past the monstrous surface and into the deeper machinery of the cosmos. It challenges our simple definitions of good and evil, of monster and guardian. He is a reminder that in the grand, ancient stories, things are rarely what they seem. The most terrifying forms can serve the most vital functions, and the most sacred laws are often protected by the most profound horrors. He is the loyal servant of a grim king, the necessary monster at the door of eternity. Thank you for joining us on this descent into the realm of Hades to understand its most famous guardian. The Eldritch Codex is dedicated to exploring these deep, and often paradoxical, corners of mythology and lore. If you found value in this exploration of the final threshold, please consider subscribing to our channel and activating the notification bell, so you do not miss our future journeys into the shadows of the past. We invite you to leave a comment below with your own thoughts on Cerberus, or to suggest another ancient legend you wish for us to unravel. Until next time, keep seeking the knowledge that lies waiting in the darkness between the worlds. The Chimera, the fire-breathing monster and the tragic hero who defeated it. From the lexicon of nightmares, humanity has drawn a word to describe the impossible, the incongruous, the monstrous fusion of things that should never be joined. We call it a chimera, an idle fantasy, a genetic impossibility, a flight of fancy. But in the shadowed annals of mythology, the chimera was no mere metaphor. It was a reality, a living, breathing, fire-belching abomination that scorched the earth and terrorized the hearts of mortals. It was a creature so perfectly, so unnaturally horrifying, that it stands as one of the ultimate testaments to the monstrous imagination of the ancient world. But what was it? The classical poets present it as a creature of flesh and blood, a singular beast born of a terrifying lineage, a monster of three parts, a lion, a goat, and a serpent fused into one terrible whole. But is that the only explanation? Could this impossible creature be something more? A relic of a forgotten age? A warning of a power best left undisturbed? Could the chimera be evidence not of a natural monster, but of a failed magical experiment, a divine weapon that went catastrophically wrong? Today we open the Codex to a chapter written in fire and ash. We journey to the ancient land of Lycia, we soar on the back of a winged horse, and we confront the beast that is the living paradox. We will explore its origins, its terrible reign, its heroic downfall, and the unsettling questions it leaves in its wake. This is the story of the Chimera explained. To truly understand the nature of a monster, we must first journey back to its genesis, to the shadowed crucible of its conception. The Chimera was not a creature that sprang from the earth as a random anomaly, nor was it a punishment sent by the Olympian gods. It was born. It was the scion of a specific and terrifying dynasty, the progeny of a lineage so steeped in primal dread that its members formed the very bedrock of monstrous legend in the Western world. To comprehend this beast of three parts, we must first unearth the family tree whose roots are nourished by cosmic chaos and whose branches would cast the darkest shadows upon the dawning age of heroes. Our story begins, as so many tales of ancient terror do, with its father. A name that even the deathless gods of Olympus spoke with the tremor of fear, Typhon. Typhon was not merely a monster. He was, by reputation and by power, the father of all monsters. He was chaos given form, the ultimate embodiment of raw, untamable volcanic power. The ancient poet Hesiod, struggling to capture the sheer scale of this being, described a creature of almost unimaginable horror. His gargantuan form was so immense that his head brushed against the very stars. His arms were so long they could stretch from the eastern sunrise to the western sunset. From his shoulders sprang not one, but 100 writhing heads of dragons, each with a flickering dark tongue and eyes that blazed with a terrifying unholy fire. His voice was a cacophony of every horrifying sound imaginable, the hiss of serpents, the roar of lions, the bellowing of bulls, and at times, the articulate and dreadful speech of the gods themselves. He was the final and most formidable challenger to the Olympian order. After Zeus had vanquished the Titans and imprisoned them in the pit of Tartarus, Gaia, the Earth Mother, enraged at the treatment of her children, brought forth Typhon as her last son. He was her final terrible champion, a force of nature sent to reclaim the cosmos for the old chthonic ways. The ensuing battle was a cataclysm that nearly unmade the world. Typhon tore mountains from their foundations and hurled them at the heavens as if they were pebbles. In their first encounter, he defeated Zeus himself, tearing the very sinews from the thunder god's limbs and leaving him helpless and defeated. It was only through the intervention of Hermes and the unwavering might of Zeus in their final, apocalyptic confrontation that Typhon was finally overthrown. blasted by 100 thunderbolts and buried beneath the volcanic Mount Etna in Sicily. There to this day his undying rage is said to fuel the volcano's fire, a constant smoldering reminder of the chaos that lies chained, but never truly destroyed, beneath the surface of our world. This was the father of the Chimera, chaos incarnate, cosmic rebellion personified, the ultimate enemy of divine law and order. The mother of the Chimera was no less terrifying, though her horror was of a different, more insidious nature. She was Echidna, the immortal and ageless mother of all monsters. While Typhon was a force of overt, cataclysmic destruction, Echidna was the patient, brooding source from which nightmares spring. She was a living paradox of form. From the waist up, a nymph of devastating beauty with piercing intelligent eyes. From the waist down, a monstrous and massive speckled serpent. She did not roam the world spreading destruction like her mate. Instead, she lurked in a hollow, echoing cave, a place the poets called Arima, deep within the secret, unplumbed places of the earth. There she lived an eternal, predatory existence, a creature of immortal youth and unspeakable hunger, preying on any who passed her lair. She was the womb of horrors, the dark matriarch of a monstrous dynasty, a being who embodied the secret, creeping terror that lurks just beneath the veil of civilization. From the union of Typhon, the ultimate chaos, and Echidna, the eternal mother of nightmares, a terrible and magnificent brood was spawned. Their children were not random beasts, they were living legends of dread, each one a dark and formidable trial sent to test the courage, cunning, and might of the dawning age of heroes. From this monstrous conception came the Lernaean Hydra, the nine-headed water serpent whose breath and blood were a fatal poison and who possessed the terrifying ability to grow 2 new heads for each one that was severed. From them came the dread Chimera siblings, the Nemean lion, a beast of immense power whose golden fur was impervious to all mortal weapons, Orthrus, the 2-headed hound who guarded the fabulous red cattle of the giant Geryon, and his more famous brother, Cerberus, the inescapable, 3-headed guardian of the gates of the underworld. And so into this fraternity of terror the Chimera was born. By its very bloodline, by the essence of its father's fiery chaos and its mother's composite, monstrous nature, it was destined to be a creature of profound, primal violence. It was forged in shadow, its spirit intrinsically tied to the very forces that sought to unravel the ordered world. It was, from its very first breath, a violation of nature, a creature whose existence was a defiant scream against the neat categories of creation. It was not one beast, but 3, impossibly and terrifyingly locked in a single, horrifying form. Its destiny was to be a blight upon the world, a living catastrophe, waiting for the hero who would dare to face a creature born of the parents of all fear. The Chimera was born, a living testament to its horrific lineage. But what precisely was this creature? To understand the terror it inspired, we must dissect it. We must deconstruct this anatomy of a nightmare. For each of its impossible parts carries its own potent symbolism and represents a unique and deadly threat. Our earliest and most definitive description comes from the ancient poet Hesiod in his seminal work, the Theogony. He paints a picture of stark and terrifying clarity, describing the beast as a thing of immortal make, not human, lion-fronted and snake behind, a goat in the middle, and snorting out the breath of the terrible flame of bright fire. This is our blueprint, the foundational text for 2 millennia of fear. Let us examine each component in turn. The front, the dominant aspect of the beast, was that of a great lion. This was not the form of a lesser predator. It was the king of beasts, a universal symbol of ferocity, raw power, and predatory majesty. The Chimera possessed the thickly muscled shoulders, the powerful legs, and the earth-shaking roar of a lion at its most formidable. Its claws were like sharpened bronze daggers, capable of rending a man's shield to splinters and his flesh to ribbons. Its gaping jaws held teeth that could crush bone to powder. This leonine form gave the creature its primary mode of physical attack, its terrifying, earthbound strength. It was the anchor of its power, the furious engine of its charge. Rising from the middle of its back in a grotesque and logic-defying fusion was the head and forequarters of a wild goat. This is, perhaps, the strangest and most unsettling element of the Chimera's anatomy. While the lion represents a recognizable, if terrifying, form of predatory power, the goat is an intrusion of the bizarre. In the ancient world, the goat was a symbol of rugged, untamable nature, of wildness that thrived in the desolate, rocky places of the world. It also carried connotations of unnatural lust and, in later Christian traditions, would become inextricably linked with the demonic. Its function in the monster's design is a matter of speculation. Some interpretations suggest the goat's head could emit a terrifying, piercing cry, a high-pitched shriek to shatter the nerves of its victims before the lion and serpent could attack. Others posit that the goat's head, being a second center of consciousness, contributed to the creature's erratic and unpredictable movements, making it an impossible foe to anticipate in battle. Its presence, more than anything, serves to emphasize the creature's profound wrongness. It is the part that breaks all biological rules, the element that transforms it from a simple monster into a true chimera, chaotic jumble of incompatible forms. And finally, its tail was not a tail at all. It was a third living creature, a long and venomous serpent, a direct inheritance from its mother, Echidna. The snake tail was a weapon in its own right, moving with a fluid, independent intelligence. While the lion front attacked, the serpent tail could strike out as a deadly rearguard, protecting the beast from any hero who might dare to approach from behind. Its fangs dripped with the lethal poison, offering a second, more insidious path to death than the brute force of the lion. The serpent symbolized cunning, ancient evil, and the chthonic, earthy power of the things that lurk beneath the surface. It was the monster's secret weapon, its final, venomous surprise. So here we have a monster of 3 distinct parts, a trinity of terror, each with its own method of attack. The lion for overwhelming brute force, the serpent for a stealthy, venomous defense, and the goat as the unnatural, horrifying core that defied all reason. It was a biological fortress, a creature capable of fighting on all fronts simultaneously. But the Chimera's most devastating and famous weapon was something else entirely. A terrifying power inherited not from its mother, but directly from its father, the fiery titan Typhon. The Chimera could breathe fire. This was not a metaphorical flame or a mere puff of smoke. It was a torrent of scorching, incandescent destruction. The ancient poets describe it as a divine and unquenchable fire, a blast of flame so intense it could melt a warrior's bronze armor, turn a forest to ash in moments, and blacken the very rock of the mountainside. This weapon gave the Chimera a devastating ranged attack, making any frontal assault virtual suicide. It was this fiery breath that elevated it from a dangerous predator to a walking, breathing catastrophe. The Chimera was in essence a perfect engine of destruction. It possessed the strength of the earth, the venom of the underworld, and the fire of a volcano, all contained within one impossible, tormented body. It was a living violation of the natural order, and when it was unleashed upon the world, the land itself would burn. For a time this creature of impossible anatomy remained a latent terror, a horror confined to the dark and desolate places at the edge of the world where its monstrous kin were born. But such a being, forged from pure chaos and fire, could not remain hidden forever. Its destructive nature compelled it to seek out a land to unmake, a civilization to terrorize. And its gaze fell upon the ancient and prosperous kingdom of Lycia, located in the rugged, sun-drenched landscape of southwest Anatolia. What is now modern-day Turkey, Lycia was a land of stark contrasts and vibrant life. It was a kingdom of sharp, craggy mountains that plunged into verdant, fertile valleys. Its people were known for their unique culture and their independent spirit. The land was ruled by a wise, if beleaguered, king named Iobates, a monarch who presided over a realm of peace and plenty. But a shadow, both literal and metaphorical, was about to fall across this kingdom. The Chimera, migrating from the desolate lands of its birth, had found a new home. It made its lair high in the forbidding peaks of Mount Chimera, a place of volcanic vents and strange, eternally burning fires that leaked from the rocky landscape that echoed the creature's own fiery nature. From this volcanic fortress, the Chimera descended upon the kingdom of Lycia, and its presence was not merely that of a predator. It was a living plague, a force of elemental destruction. Its primary weapon, its fiery breath, was a tool of ecological devastation. It scorched the green fields of the Lycian farmers, turning acres of life-giving grain into black, barren rock in a single pass. The harvests failed. The very soil was cooked into sterility. The land, once a patchwork of greens and golds, became a scarred and smoking wasteland. It was a terror to the shepherds and herdsmen. The Chimera did not hunt for sustenance in the way a natural lion would. It hunted for destruction. It incinerated entire flocks of sheep where they stood, leaving nothing but charred bones and the stench of burnt wool upon the air. It annihilated herds of cattle, their terrified bellows silenced by a torrent of all-consuming flame. The economic foundation of the kingdom, its livestock, was being systematically erased. For the people of Lycia, life became a state of constant, paralyzing fear. The roads, once bustling with trade and travel, fell silent. To journey between towns was to risk a fiery death from above. Farmers abandoned their fields and villagers huddled behind their walls, praying the monster would not turn its attention to their homes. Any traveler on the roads, any farmer who dared to till his soil, any shepherd who sought pasture on the hillsides and was unlucky enough to cross its path, was met with a swift and fiery end. There was often nothing left to bury. The kingdom was gripped by terror. Famine began to set in as the fields lay barren and the livestock vanished. The prosperity of Lycia crumbled into dust and ash. King Iobates was desperate. He sent his bravest warriors, his most skilled hunters, to confront the beast. They marched up the slopes of Mount Chimera, armed with bronze spears and stout shields, but they never returned. Their courage was no match for the creature's unholy fire. Their armor melted, their shields were consumed, and their bodies were turned to ash. The kingdom was bleeding out. Its people were starving, its armies were broken, and its king was helpless before a foe that seemed invincible, a monster sent from the deepest hells to unmake his world. He needed a hero. Not just a warrior, but someone with the favor of the gods, someone who could meet this unnatural threat with a power that was equally extraordinary. The arrival of that hero, the man destined to face the Chimera, would not be the result of a noble and righteous quest. It would be born from a dark and complex web of palace intrigue, of lust, lies, betrayal, and a secret message of death sent from a distant land. The salvation of Lycia would begin, ironically, with an act of profound treachery. The hero destined to face the Chimera was named Bellerophon. His arrival in Lycia was not as a dragon slayer for hire, nor as a noble prince on a quest for glory. He arrived as an exile, a pawn in a game of royal deceit, unknowingly carrying his own death warrant. To understand his burden, we must trace his tragic path from his home in Corinth. Bellerophon was a prince of the city of Corinth, the son of its king, Glaucus. Yet, from his birth, there were whispers of a grander lineage. It was said that his true father was not the mortal king, but the great god of the sea himself, Poseidon. This divine parentage would account for his exceptional beauty, his peerless courage, and his mastery of horses, an animal sacred to the sea god. But even a demigod's life is not immune to tragedy, and Bellerophon's was marked by the stain of blood guilt from an early age. In his youth, through an act of tragic misadventure, he accidentally killed a man. The sources are conflicted on the man's identity. Some say it was a nobleman of Corinth named Belleros, others, more tragically, that it was his own brother, Deadliest. Regardless of the victim, the act of bloodshed forced him into exile. From this deed he earned his new name, Bellerophon, the slayer of Belleros. He was now a fugitive, a man seeking purification for his sin. His journey led him to the court of King Pritus in the powerful citadel of Tiryns. There he threw himself upon the king's mercy, seeking the sacred ritual of purification. King Pritus, following the holy laws of hospitality, welcomed the young prince. He performed the necessary rites, cleansed him of his blood guilt, and offered him a place of honor at his table. But this act of kingly kindness would soon be poisoned by the corrosive passions of the human heart. The king's wife, Queen Stenebia, became utterly captivated by the handsome young hero from Corinth. His noble bearing, his tragic past, and his famed beauty ignited in her a powerful and illicit desire. She watched him, she courted him with her glances, and finally, she approached him in secret, attempting to seduce him into her bed. Bellerophon, however, was a man of honor. He was a guest in the king's home, a man who had just been purified by the king himself. To betray his host in such a manner would be a monstrous violation of Xenia, the sacred law of hospitality, an act that would surely bring the wrath of the gods down upon him. He politely but firmly refused the queen's advances. A desire scorned is a dangerous thing. The queen's infatuation curdled instantly into a vicious, vengeful hatred. To protect herself and to punish the man who had rejected her, she went to her husband, King Pritus, and wove a terrible and convincing lie. With false tears and feigned outrage, she accused the young hero of the very crime she had intended to commit. She claimed that Bellerophon, the honored guest, had attempted to take her by force, twisting his noble refusal into a story of violent assault. King Pritus was consumed by a blinding rage. He believed his wife completely. An unforgivable insult had been made against his honor and his marriage bed. Yet his hands were tied. He was bound by the same sacred law of Xenia that Bellerophon had so carefully observed. He could not personally murder a guest under his own roof, especially not one whom he had personally purified of a past crime. To do so would make him a sinner in the eyes of Zeus, the protector of guests. Caught between the demands of vengeance and the fear of divine retribution, the king devised a cunning and cowardly plan to have Bellerophon killed without staining his own hands with the crime. He would outsource the execution. He summoned Bellerophon and told him that he had a matter of great importance, a confidential message that must be delivered to his esteemed father-in-law, King Iobates of Lycia. He presented the hero with a folded tablet sealed with the king's own signet so that its contents could not be read along the journey. Bellerophon, an honorable man with no reason to suspect his host of such treachery, saw this as an opportunity to repay the king for his hospitality and purification. He gratefully accepted the mission. He could not know that inside that sealed tablet King Pritus had inscribed a secret and fatal message. The ancient script was not a letter of greeting, but a death warrant. It contained a simple, chilling request from one king to another. Pray remove the bearer from this world. He has tried to violate my wife, your daughter. Bellerophon, the noble hero, set out on his journey, the instrument of his own destruction held in his own hands. After a long journey, he arrived in the kingdom of Lycia. King Iobates, seeing a noble prince arrive at his court, welcomed him with all the honors befitting his station. For 9 days and 9 nights, Iobates feasted his guest, slaughtering 9 oxen in his honor, following the sacred customs of hospitality to the letter. It was only on the morning of the 10th day that he finally asked Bellerophon the purpose of his visit. Bellerophon, in response, presented the sealed tablet from King Pritus. Iobates broke the royal seal and read the terrible message from his son-in-law. And in that moment, he found himself in the very same predicament as Pritus. He had shared salt and wine with Bellerophon for 9 full days. The young man was now his guest, protected by the same divine laws. He could not simply order his guards to murder him. So King Iobates, like his son-in-law before him, conceived of a plan that would surely lead to the hero's death, but would keep his own hands clean of a guest's blood. He would send Bellerophon on a mission from which no man had ever returned. He told the hero of the great blight upon his land, the invincible, fire-breathing monster that was ravaging his kingdom. He commanded Bellerophon to go forth and slay the Chimera. The trap was now perfectly set. A wrong hero, a false accusation, and a secret death sentence had all conspired to send Bellerophon on a suicide mission. He was being sent to his death, not as a punishment for a crime he had committed, but for a virtue he had upheld. But Bellerophon was no ordinary man. The gods, it seemed, were watching. And he was about to acquire a partner in his quest that would lift him from the earth and give him the power to face a monster born of fire. Presented with his seemingly fatal task, Bellerophon did not despair. He was a hero, but he was also a pragmatist. He understood the nature of the foe he was sent to face. The Chimera was a monster of fire and fury, a creature whose greatest weapon was a torrent of flame that destroyed all who approached on foot. To challenge this beast on its own terms on the ground was not courage, it was suicide. He knew that his only hope lay in changing the battlefield itself. He had to rise above the flames to meet the monster from a domain it could not reach. He needed to fight from the air. And in the collective imagination and whispered legends of Greece, there existed a single, legendary creature perfectly suited for such a task: Pegasus, the magnificent winged horse. Pegasus was a creature of divine and paradoxical origin, a being of impossible beauty born from an act of ultimate horror. He was not a natural animal. He, along with his brother, the golden sword giant Chrysaor, sprang forth fully formed from the severed neck of the Gorgon Medusa at the moment of her death at the hands of Perseus. As the child of the monstrous Gorgon and the sea god Poseidon, Bellerophon's own secret father Pegasus was a creature of both the chthonic depths and the open sky, a symbol of untamable freedom and soaring poetic inspiration. For years he had roamed the skies and mountains of Greece, a wild and beautiful phantom. Many mortal kings and heroes had tried to capture him, to possess his beauty and harness his power, but all had failed. He was too swift, too wild, too proud to be tamed by any ordinary means. He was a creature of the gods, not a beast of burden for mortals. Bellerophon, understanding that a mortal challenge required a divine solution, sought guidance. He went to the wisest seer in all of Lycia, a man named Polyeidos. The old seer listened to the hero's plight and, recognizing the hand of fate at work, gave him a crucial piece of advice. He told Bellerophon not to rely on traps or force, but to seek the aid of the goddess who favored heroes of great cunning. He instructed him to go to the sacred temple of the goddess Athena and to sleep upon her altar. Bellerophon did as the seer advised. He made his way to Athena's temple and laid down to rest upon the cold stone, his mind fixed on his impossible quest. As he slept, the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and heroic endeavor came to him in a dream. She stood before him, her eyes gleaming with intelligence, her spear and shield at her side. She spoke to him, not as a distant deity, but as a patron to her chosen champion. She understood his need, and she presented him with a gift. In her hands she held a bridle. It was not made of leather or rope, but was crafted entirely of shining magical gold. It shimmered with a soft light, enchanted with the power to soothe the wildest heart and tame the most untamable spirit. In the dream she instructed him on its use. "Take this," she said, her voice echoing with divine authority. "It is the charm to win this steed. But first you must show your piety. Go and build an altar to your father Poseidon, the tamer of horses, and sacrifice a white bull to him. Then take this bridle and go to the sacred well of Perine, in your own home city of Corinth. There you will find the winged horse drinking." Bellerophon awoke with a start, the divine vision still burning in his mind. And there, lying on the stone floor beside him, tangible and real, was the very golden bridle he had seen in his dream. It was cold to the touch, heavy with purpose. This was no mere dream, it was a divine sanction. His heart, once heavy with the weight of his task, was now filled with a soaring hope. He immediately did as the goddess had commanded. He constructed a magnificent altar to Poseidon and made the required sacrifice, honoring the god who was both his father and the master of the creature he sought. Then, with the golden bridle in hand, he journeyed back to his homeland of Corinth, to the sacred spring of Perine, a place famed for its clear, sweet water. And just as Athena had promised, he found him. The magnificent Pegasus, its brilliant white wings folded at its sides, stood peacefully, dipping its head to drink from the clear water of the spring, utterly unaware of the hero's approach. Holding the divine artifact, Bellerophon approached the winged horse. Any other mortal would have sent the creature bolting into the sky in an instant. But Pegasus, a being of magical origin, looked up and saw not a threat, but the gleaming, golden bridle. He sensed the divine magic woven into it by the goddess Athena, a power he recognized and respected. The wildness in his eyes softened. He stood his ground, calm and docile, and allowed the hero Bellerophon to approach and gently slip the enchanted bridle over his head. The untamable had been tamed. In that moment, an extraordinary partnership was forged. A hero, burdened by a false accusation and an unjust death sentence, and a divine steed, the very embodiment of pure freedom. Bellerophon swung himself onto Pegasus's back and together, they rose from the earth. They soared into the sky, a vision of grace, power, and righteous purpose. Bellerophon now possessed the one crucial advantage he needed to face the Chimera. He was no longer a creature of the earth, bound by the limitations of the ground. He was the knight of the sky. The impossible quest had just become possible. The hunt was on. Mounted on his divine steed, Bellerophon was no longer a mere mortal. He was an avatar of the sky, a hero elevated to a new theater of war. He and Pegasus circled high above the desolate, smoking crags of Mount Chimera, the monster's chosen lair. From their vantage point, They could see the full extent of the beast's devastation, the charred skeletons of ancient forests, the blackened earth of once fertile valleys, the scattered, bleaching bones of livestock. The very air was acrid, thick with the lingering stench of ash and sulfur. This was not a hunt for a mere beast. It was a mission to cleanse a poisoned land. Bellerophon guided Pegasus lower, his keen eyes scanning the rocky terrain for any sign of his quarry. Then from a deep, shadowy cavern etched into the mountainside, the Chimera emerged. It was more horrifying in reality than any story could have conveyed. A monstrous fusion of nightmare and nature. The tawny, muscular body of a lion moved with terrifying power, while from its spine, the wild, black-bearded head of a goat bleated an unnatural cry. Its serpent tail whipped back and forth, tasting the air, its reptilian eyes glinting with a cold, venomous intelligence. The monster looked up, its 3 sets of eyes fixed upon the hero in the sky. It recognized the challenge. With a guttural roar that was part lion, part goat, and part hiss, it unleashed its primary weapon. A column of incandescent fire, a torrent of pure destruction, erupted from its throat. It shot upwards towards them, not as a brief puff, but as a sustained jet of liquid flame, hungry to consume them, to turn the divine horse and its heroic rider into a falling cinder. But Pegasus was a creature of the air, as nimble as the wind itself. With a powerful beat of his wings, he banked sharply, effortlessly evading the fiery column. The blast of heat washed over them, but they were unharmed. And so began the deadly aerial duel, a battle of mythic proportions fought between the sky and the scorched earth. Bellerophon guided Pegasus into a swooping attack. He drew his bow and unleashed a volley of arrows, each one aimed with heroic precision. But they were useless. The shafts either glanced harmlessly off the creature's tough, lion-like hide or burned to ash in the intense aura of heat that surrounded it. He urged Pegasus closer, casting his bronze-tipped spear, but it too failed to pierce the monster's unnatural defenses. The Chimera fought back with the coordinated fury of its 3 warring parts. The lion's head roared and snapped, its powerful claws tearing at the air, trying to drag the hero from the sky should he dare to fly too low. The goat's head on its back let out a continuous, maddening and unnatural shriek, a sound designed to unnerve and distract. And the serpent tail, moving with its own deadly grace, struck out again and again, trying to latch onto Pegasus's legs, to inject its lethal poison into the divine steed and send them both plummeting to their deaths on the jagged rocks below. It was a stalemate. Bellerophon could not get close enough to inflict a fatal wound, and the Chimera could not catch the swift, celestial horse. The hero realized that conventional weapons were futile. The beast's hide was too thick, its fiery breath created an impenetrable barrier, and its tripartite nature made it a chaotic and unpredictable foe. He needed a new strategy, an idea born not of brute force, but of the divine cunning gifted to him by his patron Athena. He needed to turn the monster's greatest weapon against itself. He retreated to a safe altitude and formulated a plan, one of profound ingenuity and extreme risk. He took his last remaining spear and, using a leather strap, affixed a large, heavy block of lead to its tip. Lead, a soft and dense metal known to the ancients, has a very low melting point. His plan was simple in its conception, but would be terrifyingly difficult in its execution. He would use the Chimera's own fire to forge the instrument of its death. The music swells to a powerful, climactic, and thunderous crescendo. The visuals focus on the final desperate attack, using slow motion to heighten the tension and drama. He turned Pegasus back towards the mountain. This would not be a cautious swoop or a ranged attack. It required a single, perfect, all-or-nothing dive. He urged his divine steed downwards into a steep, terrifying descent, a white comet streaking from the sky directly towards the monstrous, waiting foe. The Chimera, seeing the hero plummeting towards it, braced itself. It took the bait. It opened its great leonine maw wider than ever before, preparing to unleash its most powerful and concentrated blast of fire, intending to incinerate the hero in midair. This was the one fleeting moment of opportunity Bellerophon had prayed for. With the heroic battle cry that echoed across the mountains, he aimed his lead-tipped spear not at the monster's hide, but directly into the dark, fiery cavern of its open throat. With every ounce of his God-given strength, he thrust the spear forward. The spear found its mark. The result was immediate, horrific, and absolute. The torrent of divine fire erupting from the Chimera's gullet instantly met the block of lead. The heavy metal vaporized and melted in a fraction of a second, not into harmless liquid, but into a river of molten boiling death. This searing liquid metal poured down the beast's windpipe, flooding its lungs, its stomach, and its heart. It was being burned alive, boiled, and suffocated, all from the inside out. The Chimera's roar of fury turned into a final gurgling, agonized shriek. It thrashed wildly upon the mountainside, its 3 parts convulsing in a final terrible death-through lion clawing at its own throat, the goat head spasming violently, the serpent tail whipping aimlessly against the rocks. Then with a final shuddering heave, the great beast collapsed, its internal fire extinguished forever by the molten metal that now filled its core. A cloud of foul-smelling black smoke rose from its corpse. Silence fell upon Mount Chimera. Bellerophon, the hero, had done the impossible. He had slain the unslayable beast. He had lifted the blight from the land of Lycia. He had answered the challenge of a king and triumphed over a monster born of primordial chaos. His name would be sung in legend forever. But his story and his own internal struggles were far from over. And the greatest enemy he would ever face was not a monster of 3 parts, but the growing shadow of hubris in his own heart. When Bellerophon returned from the mountain, not as a fallen hero but as a victorious conqueror, the kingdom of Lycia erupted in joyous celebration. King Iobates, who had sent the young man on a suicide mission, was stunned into disbelief, then into profound admiration. A man who could slay the Chimera was clearly no ordinary mortal. He had to be favored by the gods, if not a son of the gods himself. Convinced now of the hero's divine protection, and deeply ashamed of his own part in the treacherous plot, Iobates made amends. He brought forth the sealed tablet from Tiryns and revealed to Bellerophon the terrible, secret message it contained, exposing the cowardly betrayal of his son-in-law, King Priapus. Far from seeking his death, Iobates now showered Bellerophon with every imaginable honor. He gave the hero his own daughter, Philono, in marriage, welcoming him into the royal family. He granted him a portion of the kingdom, the finest and most fertile lands in Lycia, as his own domain. And he named Bellerophon as his heir, the future king. Bellerophon's fame, once a whisper in the courts of Greece, now became a thunderous roar. His name was sung by poets, his deeds celebrated in every city. He was the man who had tamed the untamable Pegasus, the hero who had slain the unslayable Chimera. He was the savior of Lycia. But victory and adulation can be a subtle poison, more dangerous to the soul than any monster's venom. The honorable young hero who had once righteously refused a queen's advances began to change. He started to believe his own legend. The line between being favored by the gods and being an equal to the gods began to blur in his mind. He looked upon his achievements, his wealth, his power and his divine steed, and he saw not gifts from the heavens, but entitlements he had earned through his own greatness. This growing pride, this corrosive arrogance, what the ancient Greeks called hubris, would become his undoing. The hero's heart, once pure, began to fester with a divine discontent. His final fatal act of arrogance was a transgression of cosmic proportions. He decided that he, Bellerophon, no longer belonged among mortals on the earth. He believed that his rightful place was among the deathless gods themselves, in their celestial home. He resolved to ascend to the sacred peak of Mount Olympus. He went to his loyal companion Pegasus, the divine steed who had been his partner in glory. But this time his purpose was not righteous. He mounted the winged horse and urged him to fly upwards, not to hunt a monster, but to breach the gates of heaven itself. He sought to force his way into the company of the immortals, a feat no mortal had ever or should ever attempt. This was an act of unforgivable blasphemy. The gods of Olympus watched his ascent not with admiration but with the cold and gathering fury. Zeus, the king of the gods and the ultimate enforcer of the cosmic order, saw this as an intolerable affront. A mortal, no matter how heroic his past deeds, could not be allowed to penetrate the sacred barrier between the mortal and divine realms. Zeus would make a terrible and permanent example of him, a lesson in humility that would echo through the ages. He did not strike Bellerophon down with a thunderbolt. The punishment was to be more subtle, more ironic. Zeus sent a single, humble insecta gadfly to intercept the ascending hero. As Bellerophon and Pegasus soared higher and higher, nearing the golden gates of Olympus, the tiny gadfly executed its divine mission. It flew under the great horse's flank and delivered a sharp, maddening sting. Pegasus, the divine steed, was startled and driven wild by the sudden, unexpected pain. He bucked violently in the air, thrashing in a panic he had never before known. Bellerophon, the great rider, the master of the winged horse, was caught completely by surprise. His grip, made complacent by arrogance, failed him. He was thrown from his mount. He fell. The slayer of the Chimera, the hero of Lycia, the man who sought to touch the heavens, plummeted from the sky. For what must have seemed an eternity, he fell, watching the realm of the gods recede above him and the world of men he had scorned rush up to meet him. He did not die. The gods, in their terrible wisdom, reserved for him a far crueler fate than a quick and merciful death. He survived the fall, but he was left a broken man. The impact shattered his body, leaving him permanently crippled and lame. Some accounts say the shock and the terror of his fall, the horror of his divine rejection, struck him blind. Pegasus, freed of his hubristic rider, continued his flight to Olympus. There the noble beast was welcomed and given a place of honor in the celestial stables, where he became the sacred carrier of Zeus's thunderbolts. But his former master was now a wretched outcast. Hated by the gods he had so grievously offended, and shunned by the mortals who now saw him as a cursed figure, Bellerophon was utterly alone. He spent the rest of his miserable days wandering the alien plane, the plane of wandering, a broken, blind, and crippled man, avoiding all contact with humanity, consumed by his grief and his regret. The world's greatest hero had become its most pitiful beggar. His story, once a song of triumph, was now a somber, cautionary tale, a powerful and eternal warning against the dangers of hubris, and the terrible price a mortal pays when he forgets his place in the grand, unforgiving order of the cosmos. And so concludes the classical myth of the Chimera and its slayer. It is a complete and satisfying tale, a perfect Greek tragedy that warns of both monstrous nature and human pride. The official record is closed. But here at the Eldritch Codex, we are compelled to look deeper, to read between the lines of the ancient poets, and to ask the unsettling question we posed at the outset. The myth tells us that the Chimera was born a natural if monstrous, child of Typhon and Echidna. This explanation gives it a place within the established family tree of horrors. But what if this lineage is an allegory? What if it is a way for the ancient mind to explain something so profoundly unnatural that its true origin was too terrifying to contemplate? Let us, for a moment, step away from established myth and into the realm of eldritch speculation. What if the Chimera was not born but made? What if we are looking not at a creature of nature but at a feat of arcane engineering? A biological weapon, crafted by a forgotten power for a forgotten war. Consider the powers that existed before the age of Olympus. The Titans who wielded control over the very forces of creation. The primordial gods themselves, beings of unimaginable and alien power. Or perhaps even a mortal civilization, one so advanced in the arts of magic or alchemy that its knowledge has been utterly lost to time in Atlantis. A Thule, a people who dared to play God. Imagine these creators seeking to forge the perfect weapon. A living siege engine, a creature that could break armies and topple cities. Let us analyze its design from this new chilling perspective. First, the chassis, a lion. They would have chosen the lion for its overwhelming strength, its predatory instinct, and its terror-inspiring presence. It provides the core engine for a ground assault, a battering ram of tooth and claw. Next, they would have sought to overcome the lion's primary weakness, its vulnerability from the rear. The solution? A serpentine tail. This provides a 360-degree defense system. The serpent is stealthy, venomous, and has its own sensory apparatus. It is the perfect rear guard, a poison-tipped stinger that makes any flanking maneuver suicidal. But the creature is still earthbound. How to give it mastery over varied terrain, over the impassable mountains where armies cannot go. The goat. A goat is a master of treacherous rocky landscapes. It is resilient, agile, and stubborn. By integrating the goat, the creators would be adding an all-terrain capability to their weapon, allowing it to navigate any environment. And finally, the ultimate weapon system, the ranged attack. How to destroy fortifications, to incinerate enemy legions from a distance. They would have sought to harness the most destructive element of all, fire. Through some dark magic or arcane science, they engineered its respiratory system to become a biological flamethrower, drawing on the elemental fire of its father, Typhon, or perhaps some internal alchemical furnace. Viewed through this lens, the Chimera is no longer a random monster. It is a masterpiece of horrific, biological design. A living weapon system, perfectly engineered for destruction and terror. But what if the experiment failed? What if the creators in their hubris succeeded in fusing the flesh but failed to unify the spirit? What if the three distinct minds remain the noble, predatory consciousness of the lion, the wild, stubborn consciousness of the goat, the cold, cunning consciousness of the serpent, all trapped, screaming, and warring for control within a single, tormented body? The result would not be a controllable, disciplined weapon. The result would be a being of pure, mindless, chaotic rage. A creature driven insane by its own internal, irreconcilable conflict. Its actions would not be strategic, but a lashing out born of constant, unimaginable pain. Its only impulse would be to destroy the world that it could not understand and which could not possibly understand it. It would be a living, biological embodiment of a schizophrenic nightmare. In this light, the Chimera becomes an infinitely more tragic figure. It is no longer just a monster to be slain. It is a failed creation, a living torment, a piece of arcane technology that had gone catastrophically wrong. Perhaps it escaped its creators, or perhaps they, horrified at what they had unleashed, abandoned it to its fate. This reinterpretation transforms Bellerophon's quest entirely. His battle is no longer a simple act of good versus evil, of a hero slaying a monster. It becomes a cleanup operation. The decommissioning of a terrible, ancient weapon that had been left to rust and fester in the wilderness of the world. Bellerophon becomes the agent who finally gives the creature peace, the only way possible, through its utter destruction. This theory aligns perfectly with the deep, cautionary themes found in the most ancient of myths. The warning against forbidden knowledge, the terror of power that is too great for any one mortal or god to wield, and the catastrophic consequences of daring to tamper with the fundamental laws of creation. The Chimera, then, is not just a beast. It is a monument to a failure, an eternal warning etched in fire and ash. Whether a natural-born monster from a lineage of horrors, or a failed magical experiment of terrifying power, the Chimera remains one of mythology's most potent symbols. It is the ultimate embodiment of the unnatural, a creature that by its very existence defies the laws of creation. Its legacy lives on in our language, a permanent reminder of impossible fusions and the dangers they represent. Its story, intertwined with that of the tragic hero Bellerophon, serves as a dual warning. The Chimera warns of the horrors that can be born when disparate natures are unnaturally forced together. And Bellerophon warns of the horrors that arise when a mortal, no matter how great his deeds, allows pride to sever his connection to both humanity and the divine. Both the monster and the man who slew it were ultimately destroyed by a fatal flaw in their own nature. Thank you for joining us on this flight into the heart of the Chimera myth. The ancient world is filled with such creatures whose stories are as complex and cautionary as they are terrifying. If you found value in this exploration, please consider subscribing to our channel and activating the notification bell, so you do not miss our future examinations of the monstrous and the misunderstood. Leave a comment below with your own interpretation of the Chimera, or suggest another legend from the dark corners of myth you wish for us to unravel. Until next time, keep seeking the knowledge that lies hidden in the ashes of the past. The Titans explained, tyrants of old or the first gods of justice. Before the gleaming halls of Olympus stood proud against the heavens, before the thunderbolt of Zeus became the symbol of ultimate authority, and before mortals ever raised their eyes to the sky in prayer or fear, there was an age of colossal beings. An era of raw, untamed, primordial power. This was the age of the Titans. Their names echo through the chasm of history, whispered in fragments of poetry and myth: Cronus, Rhea, Oceanus, Prometheus. But who were they truly? The legends passed down to us, written by the victors, paint them as monstrous tyrant, jealous, cruel, and deserving of their eternal prison in the abyssal depths of Tartarus. But is that the entire truth? Or is there another story buried beneath millennia of Olympian propaganda? A story of the world's first guardians? The architects of a forgotten golden age? Today we journey back to the dawn of existence, beyond the veil of recorded time, to seek the answer to a question that lies at the very foundation of Western mythology. The Titans, were they the brutal tyrants of old, or were they the first noble wardens of the world? Welcome, seekers of forgotten knowledge, to the Eldritch Codex. Before all things there was the unstate, the pre-beginning, the infinite potential from which all reality would be drawn. The Greeks called it chaos. Do not mistake this for a state of disarray or confusion. Think of it rather as the gaping void, a chasm, a silent, formless, featureless abyss that held within its boundless expanse the seed of everything that ever was, and everything that ever would be. There was no light, no sound, no time, no form. There was only the vast, pregnant emptiness, the primordial womb of the cosmos, waiting for the first stirrings of consciousness. From this profound nothingness, the first protogenoid firstborn gods did not so much appear as they simply emerged. They were not created, but were self-manifested principles of creation. The dark abyss brought forth Nyx, the night, and Erebus, the darkness. And then the very bedrock of existence willed itself into being. She was Gaia, the earth, the deep-breasted one. She was not merely a sphere of rock and soil. She was a conscious, living entity. The very concept of a foundation, of a place to stand, given form and life. She was the Great Mother, the universal matriarch from whose body all life would eventually spring. But to be a foundation is to exist in relation to something else. And so Gaia, in her vast and lonely majesty, brought forth a being equal to herself, a perfect counterpart to cover and to complement her. He was born from her, yet he was her equal. He was Uranus, the starry sky. A great dome of nascent stars, of brilliant constellations and deep velvety blackness. He settled over Gaia, covering her from end to end. Theirs was the first union, a constant, unbroken, creative embrace. The sky lay upon the earth, and in this sacred marriage, the world found its structure. Their union was immeasurably fertile. From this cosmic embrace, the first generations of beings were born, children of immense scale and terrifying raw power. But their firstborn were not the graceful deities we might imagine. They were monstrous. First came the three elder Cyclopes, not the dim-witted shepherds of later tales, but beings of sublime power and unparalleled craftsmanship. There was Brontes, the thunderer, whose hammer blows echoed with the sound of storms. There was Serapis, the lightner, who captured the blinding flash of a lightning strike. And there was Argesh, the vivid flash, who embodied its searing, brilliant light. They were artisans of raw cosmic force, giants who could hammer the elements into shape. They were mighty, they were brilliant, and they were, to their father, hideous. Uranus looked upon these sons, with their single, unblinking eyes and their disproportionate strength, and he felt a primal revulsion. A fear. He saw in their untamed power not a legacy but a threat. Then Gaia bore him another set of sons, even more terrifying in their aspect. The Hecatonchires, the hundred-handed ones. Katos the furious, Briareos the strong, and Gyges the big-limbed. These were not beings of craft, but of pure, unadulterated might. Each possessed 50 heads that writhed and spoke with dissonant voices and 100 powerful arms that moved like a churning forest. They were living engines of deconstruction, a symphony of terrible strength that could overwhelm any foe through sheer, relentless force. They were cataclysm given flesh, and the sight of them broke their father's mind. Uranus, the starry sky, the king of the nascent universe, was consumed by paranoia. He could not bear the sight of these monstrous children. He could not abide the thought that such strength that might one day rival his own was allowed to walk free upon the earth. And so, he committed his first and most defining act of tyranny. He seized his own children, the Cyclopes and the hundred-handed ones, and with great violence, he thrust them back into the depths of their mother. He imprisoned them deep within the secret places of the earth, in a dark, subterranean pit of shadow and pressure known as Tartarus, a place as far beneath the ground as the sky was above it. They were returned to the womb that bore them, but this time as prisoners. Gaia, the earth, groaned in agony. Her children, her own flesh and blood, were trapped within her, a constant, writhing torment. The weight of her imprisoned sons caused her unending pain, a seismic agony that made her mountains tremble and her plains crack. The loving embrace of Auranas, the sky, had become the suffocating lid of a subterranean prison. Her love for him soured into resentment, and then curdled into a deep, burning, tectonic hatred. She would have her vengeance. And for that she needed new children. It was then that Gaia gave birth to her next and most famous children. 12 of them, perfect in form, divine in their majesty. They were not monstrous like their older siblings. They were the very pillars of the world that was to come. They were the Titans. There were 6 sons: Oceanus, the great, world-encircling river from which all other waters flowed; Ceus, the embodiment of the questioning mind of intellect and prophecy; Crius, the Titan associated with the heavenly constellations and the ordering of the year; Hyperion, the lord of light, who would father the sun, the moon, and the dawn; Iapetus, the piercer, whose sons would later challenge the heavens themselves; and finally, the last to be born, the youngest, the most cunning, and as fate would have it, the most ambitious of them all, Cronus. And there were 6 daughters, the Titanesses: Tethys, queen of the life-giving fresh waters; Rhea, the future mother of gods, whose nature was gentle and fertile; Themis, the incarnation of divine law, natural order, and unwavering justice; Mnemosyne, whose domain was memory itself, the library of all that has been; Phoebe, the shining, whose name was linked to the moon and the oracle at Delphi; and Thea, the lady of shining light, whose brilliance gave gold, silver, and gems their luster. These 12 were the first pantheon, and it was to them that their tormented mother, Gaia, came with a plan born of pain and a thirst for retribution. From within her own suffering body, Gaia drew forth a new substance, gray flint, or as the poets called it, adamantine, a substance of unbreakable, unyielding hardness. From this she fashioned a great, jagged sickle. It was a tool of harvest, repurposed as a weapon of rebellion. It gleamed with a cold, unforgiving light, its edge born of sorrow and forged in rage. She gathered her Titan sons and laid before them her indictment against the king of the heavens. Her voice was a tremor that shook the very foundations of the world she embodied. She spoke of their father's paranoia and cruelty. She spoke of their mighty brothers, the Cyclopes and the Hecatankyrs, languishing in darkness. She spoke of her own eternal, internal torment. She pleaded with them to end this tyranny, to liberate their siblings and their mother. But the Titans were afraid. To raise a hand against their father, the all-encompassing sky, the very source of their existence, was an act of unthinkable cosmic treason. One by one, Oceanus, Ceus, Crius, Hyperion, and Iapetus fell silent, paralyzed by a mixture of awe and terror. Their courage failed them. All but one. Cronus, the youngest son. He who had been born last and perhaps harbored the deepest resentment for a father he knew only as a tyrant. A fire of ambition burned in his heart, mirroring his mother's own quest for vengeance. He alone did not fear his father, he hated him. He stepped forward and took the great adamantine sickle from Gaia's hand. His grip was firm, his resolve absolute. That very night the trap was sprung. Gaia lay in wait, and as Auranas, suspecting nothing, descended from the heavens to lie with her in their customary embrace, his sons held in place by Cronus's will grabbed hold of their father from the 4 corners of the world. And from his hiding place Cronus lunged forth. With one terrible, world-altering stroke, Cronus used the adamantine sickle to castrate his own father. He severed the source of his creative power, and in doing so, severed the primordial union between earth and sky forever. Auranas recoiled in agony and defeat, pulling away from the earth, never to embrace her again. For the first time in existence, there was space between the world and the heavens. A space where new things, mountains, clouds, life, and eventually, God could stand tall. The blood of the vanquished Skyfather spattered across the world. Where it fell upon the sea, it foamed and gave birth to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, a divine being born from an act of supreme violence. Where the drops fell upon the earth, Gaia conceived yet again, giving birth to the Erinyes, the Furies' dread goddesses of vengeance, draped in shadow, whose divine purpose was to forever pursue and punish those guilty of patricide and the spilling of kindred blood. It was a dark and terrible omen, born in the very moment of Cronus's victory. Cronus the liberator. Cronus the avenger. He had answered his mother's call and ended a cosmic tyranny. He had brought a new order to the universe. In this singular, violent, and heroic moment, was he not a warden? A savior who had freed the world from a suffocating and cruel embrace? This was his first act. An act of violent liberation that would usher in a new era for the cosmos. An era that would, in the greatest of all ironies, be remembered as the Golden Age. The accounts left by poets like Hesiod paint a picture of a terrestrial Eden. During this era, humanity lived without a single care. The very concept of sorrow was unknown. There was no arduous labor for the earth under the benevolent watch of the Titans, provided for all needs spontaneously and abundantly. The soil yielded honeyed fruits from the trees and rich grains from the fields without ever needing to be plowed or sown. There was no harsh winter, no blistering summer, only a perpetual, gentle spring. The seasons did not turn in a cycle of life and death, but rested in a state of constant gentle bloom. In this utopia, there were no cities with walls, for there were no enemies. There were no weapons, for there was no concept of war. There were no courts or laws, for there was no crime. Deceit, anger, and envy were alien emotions. Mortals lived in perfect harmony with nature and with one another, their hearts free from toil and their minds free from fear. Even death itself was gentle. Old age, with its frailty and sickness, did not exist. When a mortal's long and peaceful life came to its end, they did not die in pain or anguish. They simply drifted into a deep and peaceful sleep, their spirits shedding their physical forms. And these spirits, known as daimons, did not descend to a grim underworld, but remained on earth as benevolent, unseen guardians, continuing to watch over the living. The cosmos held its breath. The unthinkable had been done. The reign of Uranosa, reign defined by creation, paranoia, and a suffocating embrace, was over. A new power now sat upon the throne of the universe. Cronus, the ambitious son, the wielder of the adamantine sickle, was king. But this was not a descent into a new form of chaos. Quite the opposite. With the sky pushed back and the world given room to breathe, the Titans did not squabble for power. They organized it. Cronus, as the new sovereign, established the first true cosmic government. He took his sister, the gentle, nurturing Rhea, as his queen, and together they presided over a structured and orderly dominion. The world was divided not through conflict but through delegation. Each Titan became a pillar of creation, a living embodiment of their domain. The mighty Hyperion and his consort, Thea, were given stewardship of the great lights of heaven. From their union would later come Helios the sun, Selene the moon, and Eos the dawn, who would trace their paths across the sky in a reliable, eternal dance. The vast, world-encircling river, Oceanus, and his wife, Tethys, ruled over the waters of the world, their thousands of children becoming the spirits of every river, stream, and spring. Zeus and Phoebe, titans of intellect and prophecy, governed the axis of the heavens and the seat of divine knowledge. And crucially, the Titaness Themis, whose very name meant divine law, embodied the unchanging, natural order of things. Her presence in this new court was a promise of stability and justice, not of arbitrary rule. This was the great Titan hierarchy. A pantheon of immense beings who govern not through petty squabbles, but through the maintenance of a grand, cosmic balance. And under their collective, watchful gaze, the world and the mortal race that was born upon it entered a period of such unparalleled peace and prosperity that future generations would speak of it with a sense of longing and disbelief. They called it the Golden Age. The ancient poets, Hesiod foremost among them, described this era as a veritable Eden under Titan rule. During this time, the race of mortal men lived as if they were gods, their hearts free from sorrow, their bodies free from the hard labor that would define their descendants. They knew not the misery of harsh old age. When their long lives reached their end, they did not die in sickness or pain, but simply a stately, powerful king overseeing a perfect creation. This is the core of the argument for the Titans as wardens. Under their reign, the world was a paradise. They did not interfere in the lives of mortals with the capricious whims and jealousies that would later define the Olympians. They were not gods who demanded constant tribute or played cruel games with human lives. They were the architects and maintainers of a perfect system. They were the forces of nature personified, holding the world in a state of sublime, unbroken balance. Cronus, as king, was the ultimate guarantor of this peace. For a time, perhaps for millennia, his rule was not only just, it was perfect. But there is a shadow that falls over every golden age, a serpent in every garden. And in this paradise, the serpent was a broken promise. At the very moment of his victory, Cronus stood upon a promise made to his mother, Gaia, promise that had fueled her support for his rebellion. He had sworn to free his elder brothers, the mighty Cyclopes and the terrifying Hecatonchires, from their prison in the black pit of Tartarus. But now, as king of the cosmos, Cronus looked upon that promise with new eyes. The calculus of power had replaced the fire of rebellion. He had seized the throne through violence and strength. Could it not be seized from him in the same way? He looked upon the prodigious power of his elder brothers not as a potential asset to his kingdom, but as the very same threat his father had seen. They were forces of chaos, beings of such overwhelming might that they could shatter any order, including his own. And so, in a cold and calculated act of political preservation, Cronus, the liberator, made a decision. He chose to become a jailer. He broke his sacred word to the Earth Mother, who had given him the means to victory. He left his brothers to languish in the suffocating darkness, their monstrous forms chained in the same prison his father had built for them. An era drifted away as if into a gentle sleep. The bounteous earth, under the nurturing watch of the Titans, provided for all of their needs without being asked. There was no need to plow the fields or sow the seeds, for the soil yielded a rich and constant harvest of its own accord. Honey dripped from the trees, and the streams flowed with milk and nectar. The seasons were unknown, for the world existed in a state of perpetual gentle spring. There were no cities with high walls, for there were no enemies. There were no weapons forged for war, for there was no conflict. There were no courts of law, for there was no crime. Humanity lived in a state of simple, profound innocence in perfect harmony with the natural world and with one another. This is the heart of the argument for the Titans as wardens. They did not demand constant sacrifice or groveling worship. They did not descend to earth to meddle in the affairs of mortals with the same capricious jealousy and lust that would later characterize the Olympians. They were the silent, steadfast guardians of a perfect system. Cronus was the king of this utopia. As the Titan of the harvest, he presided over. The cycle was beginning anew. The son was repeating the sin of the father. Gaia, her hopes for her firstborn children dashed by the son she had elevated, fell silent. Her active support for the Titan regime withered. The earth itself seemed to mourn the betrayal, a subtle chill entering the heart of the eternal spring. A crack had appeared in the golden facade of this perfect age. It was a hairline fracture invisible to the happy mortals who lived in blissful ignorance, but it ran deep into the foundation of the Titan's rule. The king who had overthrown a tyrant for imprisoning his family now kept his own family imprisoned for the very same reason, fear. The seeds of tyranny once planted by arenas and seemingly uprooted by the sickle of rebellion had not been destroyed. They had simply found new and perhaps even more fertile ground in the heart of his son. The golden age would continue, but its king was now a man ruling on borrowed time, haunted over an age of effortless abundance. In this light, his reign was not one of tyranny but of profound generosity. He was the architect of a paradise. But even in this perfect world, a shadow lingered, a question unanswered, a promise undone by a betrayal that would pave the way for a prophecy, and a fear that would turn him into a monster. Power, especially power that is absolute, is a poison for which there is no antidote. It breeds a singular corrosive fear, the fear of its loss. For Cronus, the Golden King, this fear had been a quiet whisper, born from the betrayal of his own mother. But soon that whisper would become a deafening roar. A prophecy was delivered, a decree of fate that would curdle his reign and transform the warden of the world into its most infamous monster. The prophecy came from the two beings who knew his ambition best, his own parents. The defeated Aurenas from the distant heavens and the betrayed Gaia from the depths of the earth spoke with one voice. They laid a curse upon their son, a perfect, symmetrical damnation. They foretold that just as he had risen to power by overthrowing his father, so too was he destined to be overthrown by one of his own children. These words were not a warning, they were a sentence. They coiled around the heart of the Titan King, twisting his every thought. The victory he had won now felt like a temporary reprieve. The majestic throne he sat upon felt like a precipice overlooking an abyss. Every glance at his beautiful queen, Rhea, was tainted. He saw in her not the mother of his legacy, but the vessel of his inevitable destruction. The golden age was for him over. It had become a gilded cage, and he its paranoid prisoner. Rhea soon conceived, and the time came for her to bear their first child. A daughter was born, Hestia, the very personification of the hearth of home, of familial sanctity. She was the first of a new generation, a symbol of the peace and stability of his reign. But Cronus did not see a daughter. He saw only the first incarnation of the prophecy. He saw a threat. And his response was not one of fatherly love, but of cold, terrifying, political calculation. He approached his queen, and with a terrible resolve, he took the infant goddess from her mother's arms. And then, he committed an act of such monstrous cruelty it would forever define his legend. He opened his great mouth, and he swallowed his daughter whole. He did not kill her. Gods are immortal, they cannot be truly destroyed. Instead, he imprisoned her in the only dungeon from which he believed she could never escape, the darkness within his own body. She was to remain there for eternity, alive, conscious, but helpless, a living ghost in a gastric tomb. Rhea's shriek of grief was the first true sound of sorrow to pierce the tranquility of the Golden Age. But her agony had only just begun. The cycle of horror was set. She bore a second child, the bountiful goddess Demeter, bringer of the harvest. She too was swallowed. Then came the queen of the heavens to be Hera. She met the same fate. Then his first son, the future lord of the underworld Hades. He was consumed. And then Poseidon, the future earthshaker and master of the seas. He too was imprisoned alongside his siblings. 5 times Rhea endured the miracle of birth. 5 times she felt a fleeting moment of maternal love. And 5 times she was forced to watch in helpless agony as her husband, driven mad by his fear, devoured their children. Cronus, the king who had created a world without sorrow, had filled his own house with it. The warden who had freed his brothers from one prison had created another, far more grotesque, for his own sons and daughters. Rhea was broken by her grief. But from the depths of that brokenness a new strength emerged, the strength of a mother's resolve. She could not, would not, lose another child to her husband's monstrous paranoia. When she found she was pregnant for the 6th time, she knew she could not face Cronus alone. She needed an ally. She went to the one being whose pain mirrored her own, her mother, Gaia. The Earth Mother had never forgiven Cronus for his betrayal, and she listened to her daughter's desperate plea. Together, the two goddesses, a mother betrayed by her son, and a wife tormented by her husband, devised a plan. A plan of deception, of secrecy, and of salvation. Following Gaia's counsel, Rhea traveled in secret, far from the watchful eyes of Cronus, to the remote and rugged island of Crete. There, in the dead of night, hidden deep within a cave on the sacred slopes of Mount Ida, she gave birth to her 6th child and 3rd son. His name was Zeus. This child would not be a prisoner. He was to be a savior. Rhea entrusted the infant to the care of Gaia, who arranged for his protection. The baby was nursed by nymphs and fed on the milk of the sacred goat, Amalthea. His guardians were the Caretes, armored demigods who would dance and loudly clash their spears against their shields whenever the infant cried, the din of their mock battle drowning out his wails so that the sound would never reach the ears of the paranoid king across the sea. Meanwhile, Rhea returned to her husband's court, her face a mask of sorrow, her arms holding a carefully wrapped bundle. Cronus, his mind clouded by years of obsessive fear, demanded the child. Rhea presented him with the bundle. It had the weight and shape of a newborn. Blinded by his haste and his absolute certainty that the prophecy was a tangible thing he could consume, Cronus did not notice the deception. He seized the swaddled stone and, without a moment's hesitation, swallowed it as he had swallowed all the others. A grim satisfaction settled over him. He believed the threat was finally and truly neutralized. The last of his children was gone. The prophecy was averted. His reign, he thought, was now secure for all eternity. He sat back on his throne, a tyrant content in his monstrous work, the ruler of a perfect world built upon an abomination. But far away, in a secret cave on a lonely island, a young god was growing stronger every day. He was being nurtured on stories of his imprisoned siblings and his father's tyranny. A storm was gathering. A reckoning was being forged in secrecy and shadow. The king of the Titans had swallowed a stone, but in doing so, he had unleashed an avalanche that would soon come crashing down upon his golden age. Years passed in the world of mortals like fleeting moments in the lives of the divine. Far from the golden court of the Titan king, hidden on the island of Crete, the child Zeus was no longer a child. Nurtured on ambrosia and the milk of the sacred goat Amalthea, he had grown into a god of breathtaking power, formidable strength, and a sharp, cunning intellect. The stories of his father's tyranny and his siblings' monstrous imprisonment were not distant legends to him. They were the very fuel of his existence. The time for hiding was over. The time for retribution had come. But how does a young god alone challenge an empire? How does one topple a king whose power is absolute? Zeus knew that brute force alone would not suffice. His first move would not be one of open warfare, but of brilliant, targeted subterfuge. He allied himself with the Titaness Métis, the personification of cunning wisdom and deep thought. She, like many of the second generation, saw the stagnation and paranoia in Cronus's rule, and knew a change was necessary. Together they concocted a plan. Zeus, cloaked in a magical disguise, presented himself at the court of Cronus and secured the position of the king's royal cupbearer. Métis prepared a potent potion, a mixture of wine and a powerful emetic, disguised as the celebratory nectar. At the opportune moment, during a great feast, Zeus served this draught to his unsuspecting father. Cronus, arrogant and unsuspecting, drank deeply. The effect was immediate and cataclysmic. The Titan king was seized by convulsions that shook the foundations of his mountain fortress. A violent retching tore through him, and he regurgitated the contents of his ghastly prison. First came the Amphilos stone he had swallowed in place of Zeus, which clattered onto the floor. This stone would later be set at Delphi, a monument to the god's deception and the tyrant's folly. Then, one by one, his children emerged. Not as helpless infants, but as they were meant to be, fully grown, majestic, and blazing with divine power. Out came Poseidon, his eyes stormy like the sea. Then Hades, his presence a chilling shadow. Then the goddesses, the regal Hera, the gentle Demeter, and the serene Hestia. Freed from the suffocating darkness of their father's gut, they were filled not with fear, but with a righteous, incandescent fury. They looked upon their younger brother, Zeus, not as a stranger, but as their liberator. And there, in the heart of their enemy's stronghold, the 6 young gods swore a sacred oath. They would cast down the tyranny of Cronus and the Titans. They would claim the cosmos for their own. The great war, the Titanomachy, had begun. The universe was split in two. From their ancient fortress on Mount Othrys, Cronus rallied his kin. The majority of the male Titans stood with him. Ceus, Crius, Hyperion, and the mighty Iapetus. They were beings of immense, raw, primordial power. Their strength rooted in the very fabric of the old world. Their battles were fought on an unimaginable scale, their blows shattering landscapes, their voices the sound of thunder. From the shining peak of Mount Olympus, Zeus and his siblings established their own rival citadel. They were the new generation, more dynamic, more versatile, but they were vastly outnumbered. For 10 long, brutal years, the war raged across creation. It was a devastating, grinding stalemate. The Titan's sheer force was met by the Olympians' ferocious will, but neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The cosmos itself seemed to groan under the strain of this endless, divine conflict. Zeus, seeing that the war could not be won by the same means, remembered the tales his grandmother Gaia had told him in his youth. Stories of other, older siblings. Monstrous, powerful uncles, betrayed by their own brother, and left to languish in the underworld. He realized that the key to his victory lay in correcting his father's oldest sin. He resolved to journey where no god had willingly gone before. Down into the black abyss of Tartarus. He descended into the crushing darkness, past the gates of the underworld, and into the prison pit itself. There he found them, the elder Cyclopes and the 100-handed Hecatanchires, bound in chains of darkness. And he did what his father, the so-called warden, had refused to do. He set them free. Overwhelmed with gratitude for their liberation after eons of torment, the giants swore their allegiance to Zeus. The Cyclopes, the master smiths of the cosmos, immediately set to work at their primordial forges, their hammer blows ringing with purpose. They would arm their liberators for the final battle. For Zeus, they crafted the Kuranos, the thunderbolt. It was not mere lightning, but the very essence of celestial fire and divine wrath, concentrated into a weapon he could wield. For Poseidon, they forged the trident, a three-pronged spear with the power to command the oceans, stir the seas to fury, and shake the very foundations of the earth. And for Hades, they crafted the Kyne, the helm of darkness, a cap of invisibility woven from shadow that allowed its wearer to move as an unseen terror among his foes. The Hecatanchires, their 100 arms now free, their 50 heads roaring with the fury of ages, joined the Olympian war effort. They became the ultimate living artillery. With their combined strength, they could pick up and hurl hundreds of massive boulders at once, a relentless, crushing barrage of stone and fury that rained down upon the Titan stronghold. The tide of the war had turned. The stalemate was about to be broken. The final battle of the Titanomachy was a cosmic conflagration that defies mortal comprehension. As Hesiod described, it was as if the sky and the earth were crashing together. Zeus, now armed with his thunderbolts, ascended to the peaks of Olympus and unleashed an unending storm of lightning. The heavens screamed. The flashes were so brilliant and so constant that they blinded the Titans. The heat was so intense that the forests of the world caught fire and the great river Oceanus itself began to boil. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, creating vast chasms that swallowed Titan warriors. Hades, cloaked in his helm of darkness, moved unseen through the enemy ranks, spreading terror and confusion. And above it all, the 100-handed ones unleashed their terrible assault, a bombardment so overwhelming that the Titans felt as if a second, falling sky of rock and stone was crushing them into submission. Faced with this terrifying combination of divine weaponry, strategic cunning, and the raw, untamable fury of their freed uncles, the Titans finally faltered. Their primordial strength was no match for this new, dynamic, and perfectly armed assault. Their lines broke. Their will was shattered. Their mountain fortress began to crumble. After 10 years of war, the great conflict was over. Mount Othrys fell. Cronus was defeated. The Olympians were victorious. A new power now ruled the cosmos, born from a prophecy, forged in rebellion, and tempered in the apocalyptic fires of a war between gods. The reign of the Titans was over. Victory. The war was won. The din of battle faded, leaving a silence that was heavier than any sound. Zeus, standing atop the peak of Mount Olympus with the smoking thunderbolt in his hand, was the new, undisputed sovereign of the cosmos. But victory in war is always followed by the grim task of peace, the judgment of the vanquished. And the judgment passed by the new Olympian king would be as terrible and as world-shaping as the war itself. For the primary belligerents, the male Titans who had waged war against Olympus, there would be no mercy, no peaceful retirement, no quiet exile. Zeus, remembering the endless darkness of his siblings' prison, chose a punishment of perfect, cosmic irony. Cronus, the deposed king, along with his loyal brothers and generals Zeus, Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus were bound in unbreakable chains, forged by their own liberated brothers, the Cyclopes. They were dragged to the very edge of creation and cast down past the realm of mortals, past the shadowy kingdom of Hades, and into the deepest, darkest, most desolate pit in all of existence, Tartarus. This was the ultimate prison, a lightless, crushing void, sealed by gates of bronze and surrounded by a triple wall of night. It was the very same abyss where Arenas had first imprisoned his monstrous children, the very same dungeon where Cronus, in his own act of tyranny, had left them to languish. The cycle of cosmic justice, or perhaps cosmic cruelty, was complete. The son had inflicted upon the father the exact fate the father had inflicted upon his own. And to ensure there would be no escape, Zeus appointed new jailers. The Hecatanchires, the 100-handed ones, once prisoners of this pit themselves, now stood as its eternal, fearsome guardians. A grim and final seal on the Titans' defeat. But not all of the fallen received the same sentence. For some, Zeus devised punishments of unique and terrible ingenuity, crafted to fit their specific roles in the war. For the mighty general Atlas, son of Iapetus, who had been one of the Titans' most formidable leaders, a special torment was reserved. He was not cast into Tartarus. Instead, he was condemned to stand at the westernmost edge of the world, at the pillar of the heavens, and to bear upon his immense shoulders the entire weight of the sky for all eternity. His was a punishment of perpetual, agonizing labor, an eternal strain forever preventing his grandfather, Auranes, from embracing his grandmother, Gaia, ever again. Atlas became a living monument to the consequences of rebellion, his name forever a byword for immense burden and unending suffering. And yet, the complexity of this new era is most starkly revealed not in the punishment of Zeus's enemies, but in the fate of one of his allies. The Titan Prometheus, brother of Atlas. A being of forethought and immense cunning, he knew the Titans were destined to lose. And so he had abandoned his kin and fought alongside Zeus, lending his counsel to the Olympian cause. He should have been honored. Instead, he became the subject of Zeus's most infamous act of cruelty. Prometheus looked upon the new race of mortals, whom the gods had created as weak and helpless creatures, and he was filled with pity. In a final, great act befitting a warden of the world, he defied the will of Zeus. He stole a spark of the sacred fire from the heavens, a symbol not just of warmth, but of knowledge, of craft, of technology, of civilization itself, and he gifted it to mankind. For this act of compassion, Zeus's retribution was swift and gruesome. He had Prometheus dragged to the Caucasus Mountains and chained to a rock. And every single day, a great eagle, the personal emblem of Zeus, would fly down and feast upon the Titan's liver. And because Prometheus was immortal, his liver would regenerate completely every night, only for the excruciating torment to begin anew at dawn. The hero who helped create the new order was punished for trying to improve it. It was a clear, brutal message. The mercy of the gods had its limits, and the will of Zeus was absolute. Still, Zeus was not a mindless destroyer. He was a politician. The female titans, the titanesses, were largely spared punishment. They had mostly remained neutral, and they were the mothers, aunts, and grandmothers of the new pantheon. Rhea, the mother of the Olympians, was held in honor. Themis, whose domain was divine law, became a key advisor to Zeus, her wisdom helping to shape the laws of the new age. Mnemosyne, mother of the muses, was also assimilated, her power over memory essential for the arts and histories to come. The old world was not entirely erased, it was defeated, absorbed, and repurposed. Those like Oceanus, who had wisely remained within their domains and refused to take a side, were left to their rule, their power acknowledged but now subservient to the authority of Olympus. So the Titans did not simply vanish. They became the foundation upon which the Olympian world was built. They were a cautionary tale whispered to rebellious children. They were a source of ancient, chained power in the depths of the earth. They were the eternal burden holding up the sky. They were a legacy of chains, fire, and a constant lingering shadow of a world that once was. And so the dust of that cosmic war has settled. The echoes of the Titanomachy have faded into the annals of myth. We have journeyed from the dawn of creation to the dawn of a new Olympian age. We have witnessed heroism and horror, order and chaos, liberation and imprisonment. And now we must return to the chasm of our central question, a question that lies at the very heart of this foundational myth. Who were the Titans? Were they the brutal tyrants of old, deserving of their eternal chains? Or were they the first wardens of the world, tragic figures whose golden reign was unjustly torn from them? The truth, as it so often is when dealing with the great archetypal forces of creation, is not a simple choice between darkness and light. The verdict is not a single word, but a paradox, buried deep within the heart of their legend. Let us first consider the evidence for the wardens. The case is compelling. They were born of a righteous rebellion, a necessary act to end the suffocating paranoid tyranny of their father Uranus. Their first collective act was one of liberation. Under their stewardship, guided by the authority of Cronus, the cosmos experienced the Golden Aegea period of such perfect peace and effortless abundance that it would haunt the memory of all future generations as a lost and unattainable paradise. They did not meddle or demand. They were the pillars of the universe, the governors of its natural laws, the architects of a sublime, if distant cosmic stability. In this light, they were unquestionably the world's first, and perhaps greatest, guardians. And yet, the evidence for them as tyrants is equally undeniable and utterly terrifying. We witness the warden become a prisoner of his own power. Cronus, the liberator, became a king so consumed by a prophecy that he perpetuated the very cycle of familial violence he had once fought to end. His reign was founded upon a broken promise to his mother and a cold betrayal of his elder brothers. And the Golden Age itself, so perfect on its surface, was presided over by a sovereign who would devour his own kin to protect his throne. His was a peace maintained by an act of monstrous suppression. Their final, desperate war was not a noble last stand for a golden ideal, but a violent, reactionary struggle to preserve a stagnating power against the inevitable, dynamic tide of change. So what, then, is the final verdict from the Eldritch Codex? The Titans were both. And more than that, they were a tragic necessity. They were the first wardens. They represent the universe's first great attempt at imposing order upon the formlessness of chaos. They were a necessary steeper structure built upon raw, elemental power. But their nature, like the old world from which they sprang, was absolute, rigid, and ultimately unchanging. Their power was primordial, and it lacked the nuance for what the cosmos was to become. And because of this, they were destined to become tyrants. Their story is a foundational myth about the life cycle of power itself. It teaches us that power born from revolution often calcifies into the very oppression it sought to destroy. The hero takes the crown, and in time, the crown remakes the hero into a despot. Cronus is the ultimate archetype of this tragedy, the savior who becomes the monster, not out of pure malice, but out of a desperate, fearful need to preserve the very order he created. The Titans had to fall. Their static, absolute rule had to be broken by a new generation, the Olympians. For all their own manifest flaws, their jealousies, their rages, and their caprices, The Olympians represented a new kind of order. It was a more complex, emotional, and dynamic power, one that could engage with the world, with mortals, with art, with law, and with personal glory in a way the distant elemental titans never could. The fall of the titans was not merely a victory for Zeus. It was a necessary and painful step in the evolution of the cosmos itself. They are the tragic first draft of divinity, a generation of gods who brought the world out of the darkness, only to be consumed by the shadow of their own magnificent power. The story of the Titans is not, in the end, a simple tale of good versus evil. It is the epic tragedy of a generation caught between creation and destruction, a timeless reminder that the line between guarding the world and imprisoning it is perilously, eternally thin. Thank you for journeying with us through the ages, back to the very foundations of Western myth. The story of the Titans is a rich and complex tapestry, and our interpretation is but one thread. What is your verdict? Were they tragic heroes undone by fate? Or were they monstrous tyrants who earned their chains? Share your judgment in the comments below. And if you wish to continue unearthing the forgotten histories and exploring the deepest corners of myth and lore, be sure to subscribe to the Eldritch Codex and ring the bell of notification. That way, you will never miss a descent into the archives of the unknown. Until next time, keep seeking the knowledge that lies hidden in the shadows of the past. For within the Eldritch Codex, there are always more secrets to reveal.